Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the one-click quick view. In this training, I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily set up a quick view pop-up for any type of record and quickly customize that to show tables, pictures, and that can be for any table at all, even for invoices and any kind of items. It's going to be an incredible training. I've got so much to show you, including how to automatically change the themes on a drop-down list in just a single click. It's going to be a great training. I've got so much to share with you, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining me. I've got a really fantastic training for you today. So much to share with you. What we want to do in this one is we want to look at records, but we want an easy way for our end users to look at it. We want to be able to see all the data in it. But looking at a table is quite hard. If we look at a table, it's kind of hard to visualize all the data in here. But what we want to do is we want to quickly view the data in a very user-friendly manner, and that's where the quick view comes in hand. In this case, we're going to be able to show customer fields or any type of field for any type of table. It is a single macro that's going to handle every type of pop-up. We can also show the records associated with it. For example, we might want to show customer invoices associated with a customer. We might want to show invoice items associated with an invoice. This is called the quick view pop-up, and it's going to allow it to be used on any type of table, any type of list with just a single macro, and it's going to be fully customizable. In the setup screen, we're going to be able to select the header row, the start column, and if there's a picture, if there's a linked table, and we're going to be able to do it very, very easily. This is going to be a quick training. I hope you do enjoy these trainings. I bring these to you each and every Tuesday. I always appreciate your support. Many great ways to support us. First, you can start by making sure you've subscribed to our channel. Click the subscription button below, and don't forget to click the notification icon bell. That'll ensure that you get these trainings to you each and every week. Also, feel free to smash the like button and comment below. I respond to each and every comment. I do appreciate that. I've got incredible deals for you. If you want to further your learning, the best way to do that is either with our mentorship program, where I teach you how to create your own Excel-based software for passive income, and I take you through an entire 88-week course, 132 hours of an incredible course, and that's with our mentorship program. myexcelmentor.com will get you all the details there. Also, if you want to further your learning, each and every week I create an updated feature request based on these videos. So if you have a specific feature that you want added, you want me to fix something, or you want me to focus on an area, I'm doing that in our Patreon platform. Patreon is where it's at. For just a few dollars a month, I can have that plus beautiful PDF code books of all the information. We've got downloadable videos. I've got tons and tons of other stuff on our Patreon, including previews of upcoming weeks, feature requests, and a whole lot more. So I hope you'll join us there on Patreon. I'm going to include the link down below. All right, let's get started with this week's training because I really got a lot to cover, although this will be a relatively quick training compared to the others. Some are many hours. This one may be probably an hour or so. Let's see how it is. I'm going to walk you through every step of code. Now, the idea is we want something really customizable. So let's say we've got customer information here, but maybe I want to show customer ID. Notice customer ID is in column A. It's on the first row here. So what if I want to show that? Well, the best way to do that is just to set that column. If I'm going to hit the starting column at column 1, right, that means I want to show that customer ID. So all I need to do is just select a customer. That customer ID is now apparent. So we now see the customer ID. If we don't want to show a picture, we don't need to. That picture's on the last row. I just switched to column 9. That picture's not going to show up. So now when I go in the picture, that picture is not, because the last column is where our picture is. Column 10 is where our picture is located. This is column 10. So it's fully customizable. Of course, we can change the theme through a drop-down list in the setup screen. We can also have a link table. Maybe we don't want to show the invoices for that customer, so we just delete that, right? We don't want to show customer invoices. So now we just click it and it's going to show our customer. So this is really cool because it's fully customizable. For example, in our invoice table here, we're showing invoices. We will show up the order date, the customer ID, and so on and so forth, customer name, and we have the invoice items. Maybe we don't want to show the invoice items. So in our setup screen, we just remove the invoice ID and or the linked table. Either one would be fine because it requires both. So now going to invoice, it's only going to show the invoice information and not that linked table. So I'm going to show you how to do all this with a single macro. So it's going to be really, really great. So we'll put those back on customer ID and we'll put those back on linked ID. So let's go over this with you. We have just a setup screen. a customer list, an invoice list, and an invoice item list. So it's very, very simple, right? There's not a whole lot going on in this, but the value is huge because we're able to look at these records on a single click and look at them really in an easier way. So let's say you don't want to create a specific form. We do a lot of sheet forms for customers, but you just want to view it from a list, right? We want to see who's that customer. We want to get all the information from that, and maybe we want to see a picture. How do we do that on just a single click? Well, what we can do is we first need to set things up. So what I want to do is I want to create a list of worksheets. That's going to be really important because we need to select the sheet in which we want it to show up. So we want to know where we're going to show up at, right? I only have two, but if you have a large workbook, you can put a lot of them in here, right? So you just need to follow this. Pretty much all you need is this quick view setup. So you can create this yourself. You can create this on any workbook. You can copy and paste this sheet into your own workbook and the single macro and a few other small macros that help you organize it. We're going to go over every step. So you're going to be able to apply this to your own workbook. So as opposed to starting with this workbook, you can just take all this. And I'm going to show you how. Of course, you can download this workbook absolutely free using the links down below. Free. Of course, if you'd like to pick up 200 of my best workbooks, I've got that available to you as well. All right, so we have a list of workbooks. So I'm going to show you a quick macro on how to get those. We have a drop-down list of themes, so we can change the theme. What we also have is I want to know the width of what is the standard width. We can set a specific width if we want to. This width is defined because we've got a picture, right? But we may want a default width. If we want to set that default width to less, we can. That's the width of this shape. The width, we want to set that to a default. And we always want to know the selected row. The selected row is going to be highlighted. So if we go in here, we know the selected row. Notice the selected row is 5. So that is going to be used conditional formatting. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to put that row 5. I don't want to put it on this sheet. I want to have a single sheet that always has that selected row. So many times we've done conditional formatting where we put the selected row on the current sheet, but this time we're going to put it in the setup screen. That way you can apply this to if you have 100 tables inside a single workbook, you can apply this single macro to every single table. So it's really helpful, really dynamic, and really customizable. So you may not want red, of course, but you can easily change it to any color you want, and it'll customize that. So it's really, really dynamic. So we have a list of sheets, and of course we have the selected row here. What we also have is a sample shape. Now we're going to be creating this particular background shape, and what we want is a sample, right? So we want a sample. We'll copy this sample into whatever sheet we needed it. We also needed a sample close button here. I want to be able to close it using this close button. So I want to be able to turn it off just like that. So we need that close button. So I'm going to bring this one in. Now keep in mind that our close button already has a macro sign to it. We'll be going over that. I need a sample label, this shape, label shape. I need this sample because it is this label that when we create these, we're going to be using these labels here. These are all labels here, right here and here and here. So we need to be able to create that, duplicate it. And then also what we need is to have a sample field. This here is our sample field. It is this sample field that's going to get duplicated when we create these little pop-up quick view forms here. Now these are just for visible. Of course, they're not actual forms. We can't actually change and update data in there. We would use a user form, but I really like the idea of this. Now we could use a user form to do it, but there's a lot more flexibility and a lot more speed when we use this. If you just want a quick view, you just want to get some information, you want to see it, it's really helpful. Now you also might not want to have it on selection. You might want to put a little bit of icon here so that when you select a line, it doesn't show up. This doesn't show up, but it only shows up when you select an icon. Maybe you want like a little magnifying glass here. You could do that too. Put a little magnifying glass, and only when you select the magnifying glass, run this macro. Very, very simple and very easy to do that too. This macro, right now we have it running on selection change event. When we make a selection change, it pops up. You could just as easily tie this macro to a specific icon, and that icon can be displayed on a selected row. So there's many things you can do that, a lot of flexibility. But what's really nice is that it follows it. So no matter how long your list is, you're going to always be able to see that there's no picture on, there's no data. There's no data, right? There's no invoice data. Nothing's going to show up, which is kind of nice and convenient, right? Only when we actually have invoice data do we get something, which is kind of helpful. I like that too. Okay, so continuing on. So we have our samples. Those will get duplicated. Those are what's going to create our little pop-up quick view. Then we have a quick view sheet details. This is where all the details. This is how we set it up. Right? So when we make that setup, we need certain things. I need to know if I want to display that quick view pop-up, what sheet do I want to display on? We have a drop-down list of sheets. What is our header row? Now, what we can do is we can also create some type of help. If we know the header row, we can also automate the start and end column. Those can be automated through macros, and it's going to help guide us so we know the column. But of course, we can change it. So that can be done through a macro, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So, but we want to know what row is the header row. Our header row is, in this case, 2, right? 2. So I want to know what row is our header row. It's not the title, it's the row where our headers are. In this case, it's going to be 2. Okay, let's count how many times I say in this case in this video. That's 3 so far. All right, so up to back in there. So what we want to do is really something really dynamic. If I don't want to show all the columns, if I only want to show columns 3 and 4, I can do that as well. So just showing whatever columns of data I want. Is there a picture? If so, where is that picture located? Here, right? And which of it? So what we also want to do is, once I know the start and end columns, what I then want is the dynamic drop-down list on all of the headers. Notice that the invoices, right? Let's add it here. Notice there's no drop-down list here, right here, right? There's no drop-down list. If I add invoices here, and this can come in handy, and I know the header row here, automatically it's going to be able to determine what are the header rows, and we can then select, if there was a picture here, what field would the picture be in here. So that's really dynamic, and I'll show you how to do that too. So there's a few macros that are associated with the setup. There's one single macro that's going to help us create this. Okay, and then if we're going to be linking a table, right? So invoices, we might have an invoice items, and how are these two tables linked? How is invoices and how is invoice items linked? Invoices, of course, has an invoice ID. Now, when we go to invoice items, we see that all these invoices also have an invoice ID, right? Because we have to know what's associated. So, for example, this would be our first item. This is just kind of the way I did it. Our first item in invoice 1 would be here. Our second item would be here. It's kind of strange. Usually they're all together. Our third item would be here. So you get the idea. It was just easier for me to create some sample data like this. Our fourth item in invoice number 1 would be here. So it's all here. And all we need to do is run an advanced filter based on a specific invoice ID, and then we get all of the items that are associated with that ID. We can then take those invoice items and bring them into our pop-up form, and I'll show you how we're going to do that. So we want to know, right? So we want to be able to do that. So how are we going to do that? And of course, we want another drop-down list. Notice there's no drop-down list. They're created dynamically based on this type of table that was selected. So that means if you have a large workbook with a large table, these drop-down lists are automatically going to be based on the headers, right? It's very simple. Now, those headers are going to be located right here as we create these. Notice if I delete this, right? If I delete that and I just double click on our invoices again here, it's going to automatically recreate and repopulate. These are going to be drop-down lists, customized drop-down lists based on this. So it's from this list that I'm going to be able to pull that data validation. If we look into the data validation here, click on data validation, we see it's invoice headers. And if we look on here, it's going to be customer headers, data validation. So we're creating data validation based on that. So as we add more, for example, if we were to put invoice items down here, set a header row, it would automatically populate those invoice items. Although we're not using it in this particular training because there's nothing under invoice items, but we could easily create one for that too. So how do we do all of this? Well, first let's go over some of the macros that are located inside the setup screen. Then we'll get into the quick view. So we're going to go directly into VBA through the developer into Visual Basic. If you don't have that, Alt F11 will get you inside there. We're going to start with the setup screen, and we're going to focus on some worksheet change events. When the user actually makes a change to the worksheet, we want to do something. And if they make a selection from G5 through H99, G5, that's where we're going to start out. G5 is here through H. So anywhere that they make a change, notice that we have some things that are required. Remember, I want to populate this list and I want to get those data validations. If I know what sheet and I know the header row, I want to populate the drop-down list both in column K and I want to populate it in column N. So how are we going to do that? Well, the first thing what we do is determine all of those headers. And then what we want to do is put them in a list here. Then we'll create a named range. And it is this named range that we're going to add here and here. So that's what we're going to do inside the code. So the first thing we want to do is see when the user has made a change. We also want to make sure that G and the target row doesn't equal empty, and we also want to make sure H doesn't equal empty. That means we need to make sure there's a sheet. We need to make sure that there's a header row, right? We need both of those things in order if we're going to be getting all of those headers. I need to know what the header row is, and I need to know the sheet for that. So those are all required. So assuming that we have those, we can then move on. So first thing what I want to do is I want to make sure that H is a number. If it is not, if that equals false, is numeric, H in the target row is false, then exit the sub, right? We have to have a header row. That header row has to be a numeric value. I'm just going to put a note in here called header row must be numeric value. Okay, so then I also wanted to mention the sheet name as a string. We're also going to mention the header row as a long. I need to know the header column. Why do I need to know the header column? I'm going to be looping through the columns and getting all the values. So as I go from column 1 all the way to the last column, from the start column to the end column, I need to get all those values. So we need to dimension a variable for that. Header column, sheet column, I need to know what column, and I need to know the first column and the last column as we loop through those columns. I also need to know what setup column is. What do I mean? And I need to know the setup row. What do I mean by that? Well, inside the setup screen, I need to know what column we're going to be adding those headers. And I also need to know what row, starting with row 5 and moving down. I need to know what column. I'm going to have to look for those sheets in here. I need to find the sheet, see what sheet it's on. Once I find the sheet, I'm going to know what column. Customers we know is on column equals column, right? Column V is going to be 22. Invoice is going to be column 23. So if I know that, I need to know what column. So we have to define those. And I also need to know, so the setup row, and as we move, adding those headers down those rows, we need to get the row. So also we're going to set the header row. We know the header row is in column 8, so we're going to set that into a variable here. H is going to take on our header row. Okay, moving along, the sheet name is going to be located in G. So this is our header, put in header row, and this is our sheet name, worksheet name, and that's not the code name, worksheet name. Sometimes we use the code name, sometimes we use the actual sheet name. Okay, so the setup column, here's where we're going to find that sheet name. I need to look for that sheet name. How do I know that sheet name? Well, it's right here. It's going to be based on this, right? This here is going to be based on this right here. We'll get into the macro that creates these, but it's going to be basically a link. So all of my sheet names are located here. I need to find what column that sheet name is on. So the next line of code is going to help us find that column using the find command. So the setup column is equal to range U4 through AB4. This is all of our sheets. If you've got a large workbook, you're going to have to expand this table. As many sheets as you have, just expand this. So I'm just simply looking U4 all the way through AB4. That is the range that we're looking in. We're going to use the find command, and I want to find the sheet name using XL values and XL. I just want to find the column that it's in, so we're going to use that as column. Okay, we're going to set the initial setup row as 5. Right, so now we have the column here if it's found. We also have the row here. The starting row is 5. We're just going to increment that every time we add it. So all we need to do is range. We don't need to specify a sheet because we're already directly in this setup sheet. So we do not need to specify a sheet in this case. And then that's for cells 5, row 5, right? Starting with 5, all the way to the setup column, all the way through 34. We want to clear the contents. I want to clear any previous contents. As we add them, I want to make sure in case we change the header rows, first thing we want to do is clear all the previous headers. Next up, I want to set the last column. What is the last column? Well, we're going to use this. I'm going to go all the way to column 23. So basically, we're going to go in every single, if you have a large database that's going to extend beyond column 23, right, you're going to need to set that. So we're setting the last column up right around here. I need to fix that. Notice it should make sure that it's going to actually have data. Okay, so W is column 23. So I'm going all the way to W here, but my data ends at right around J. So keep that in mind. Although a quick view should probably have some data on that, but it's interesting that it shows up there. So it's kind of cool. So we have that just to show the customer. We can show limited customers. If we want to show just a little bit, we can show just a little bit. You know, just phone and email would of course be only columns 3 and 4. So that's kind of a nice way to do that if you only want to show a little bit of data. And that's just because we've duplicated it here. It's found it here. So we don't need 2 customers, right? 3 and 4 here we don't need. So let's clear that out, right? We only wanted to find it on one location here. You wouldn't want to have duplicate tables, so we can show all the data, right? We only want to have one instance of one sheet down here. here, not 2 instances as I've had here. So we have that. So we want to show the last column. So what I want to do is I want to get the last column. So I'm going to choose the last possible column, and then we're going to use a single line of code to do that. So the last column going to be equal to this workbook sheet name based on the sheet there, and then based on the header row. What is that header row? 23. I want the last column with the value to the left. This is going to get the last column with a value. And with automates based on auto hotkey, because I'm typing with. I like to type in and with usually, except when I use with inside the comment here. So the first column, what's the first column? The first column is going to be based on the header row, column 1. We'll just set that to column 1. That's the first possible, right? First possible. So then what I'm going to say, if the first column equals the last column, then the first, just going to reset the first column just on no, if there's no blank columns, right? It's just going to set that first column to 1, just to make sure. That's going to automate, because I want to know what the first column is. In this case, if it's 1, of course, we're just going to set it to 1. All right, next what I want to do is I want to set the default first column, right? If I in the target row value, or just going to put set the first column defaulted to 1, not really an if and that. So what do I want to do? So basically inside the setup screen, once I've created it, and let's say invoices here, and I've put the header row, why don't we set the default to the starting column? Why don't we set the default to the ending column? That's just what I've done here, setting that default, right? Notice invoices go to from 1 to 7. So we're setting the default at 1, we're setting the last one in case we want to add them all, right? If we do, then that automatically adds the last one. Of course, you can change them. Maybe we don't want to show total. Maybe we only want to go to 6. So we can set all the columns here. All right, so we have that. It's going to set the defaults. Of course, you can change them. We're setting those 2 defaults in these 2 lines right here. I is going to take on the first column. J is going to take on the last column. Then we're going to run a loop. Now I'm ready to build. What do I want to do? I want to build this list right here, starting in row 5, going all the way down, building the list. So we can do that with a loop. For the header column equals the first column to the last column. Loop through all columns, header, all column header. So I'm going to take that header and I'm going to place it directly in the setup row and the setup column. Taking this value, remember, setup row is going to increment 1 by 1 by 1. This workbook sheet name tells the header row, the header column, the value, right? Header row value. So that's the value of the header row. We're just going to bring those in. So that's going to basically bring them in directly in here. This, once they're all there, we can then create a named range based on that. Now, if it already exists, that named range, we'd have to delete it. So if we look in the formulas, name manager, right? And we see invoice headers here, This is the name range that created. If I delete that, click OK, close, it's no longer there. But all I need to do is just double click on here, on make change here or here. And if we go back into the name manager, we see that it's now been created. Invoice headers, here it is, it's right back in. Is that change code on G through H that's going to make that happen? This is the code we're focusing on. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing, anytime we want to create a named range, we certainly must make sure that any named range with the existing name gets deleted, right? Because what it'll create a bug if I don't delete it, if I try to create another one automatically by changing here or changing here, it's going to create a bug because we haven't deleted the first one. So the first thing we want to do is make sure. Now, if it doesn't exist, it would create an error. So we want to wrap that in on error resume next and on error go to 0. This is going to delete that named range. Also keep in mind that named ranges cannot have any spaces, but sheets can. Notice invoice items has a space between those names, right? But named ranges cannot have spaces. So we certainly want to remove any spaces. So we're going to simply use the replace command, sheet name, any spaces found in the sheet name, we're going to replace it with an underscore. And this is helpful because if I create one for the, let's say, invoice items, it does, and I put 2 in here, it does create it. Notice it does create, which is what I want. But if we look in the formula name manager, we see that invoice item headers, the name now contains that underscore. So we replace that space with an underscore there. So otherwise that prevents any bugs from happening. So we have that there. So the next thing, once I've deleted it, what I want to do is I want to create that named range. So we're going to use setup names add. We're going to replace again here any spaces with an underscore using the replace command and underscore headers. That's going to be our named range. I want it to be equal to, right? We're equal to, what's it going to be equal to? Basically all that range, also on the setup screen, cells 5. We probably don't need the word setup here because we're inside the sheet. But then from the setup column all the way to the setup row -1, the address of that. So basically the address of whatever this is, the address of this row from 5 to the last row minus 1. We have to subtract 1 because the for next loop would put it here on 12, but I really want to put it here just on the last one. So that way it's going to create a named range, and we're going to set the address. So we look into the named range here, name managers, this one right here, editing that. When we edit that, we see that this is the address right here that we've created, the setup. This is that formula. This is the address that we've created. Once we have that address, we can then create that named range. So here's the address that we're using here, equals the address. So that's the address of that. So once I have that, what I want to do is I want to add the validation. Now is where we add the validation into columns K and into columns N. But of course, anytime we do add in validation, we must first delete the existing validation. So in 2 separate lines of code, we are going to delete whatever's in K. We are going to delete the validation, whatever's in N, and then simply we're going to add it in K and add it in N with the validation, add the validate list, alert stop, formula. We're giving a specific formula. That formula is going to be equal to, and again, we're going to use the replace sheet name and the headers, right? So here we're adding that named range that we just created. We created that named range here using this formula right here. We're simply adding that both to K and whatever chart rows and N. That adds the validation, it creates a named range, and we've done it all, created default header rows. So with just this little bit of code, we've done all of that. Great. So I've shown you that. So once we have the name range, all we need to do is just put in the information here, and we can put in the link tables here. We've already got our link tables here. So let's go ahead and I've got some macros in this setup, but we've only got a little bit of on selection change. If the theme group, first of all, this is the theme group. I've created a group of shapes. How do we change themes? Well, basically, I've just created a group of rectangle shapes right here, and it's based on individual themes, right? Because I want to be able to change the theme, right, very easily. If I want red, I want to show red to show up. So when I select customers, it is that red color that's going to show up. So we can easily change themes. But to do that, I'd like to have a nice drop-down list. So how do I do that? Well, on selection change, I want something to happen. On the selection of E3, and that's when I want it to happen. So what do I want to happen? Well, I want to show this group of shapes. Basically, it is these 7 rectangles here. I've grouped them together and called them theme group, and called a group called theme group. So it is that one that I'd like to display. So when a user makes a change, however, when it's up, if we select any other cell, I want it to be hidden. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing what we do is on selection change of any cell on this worksheet, I want to hide this group. So we do that with here. The first thing, but only if it's visible. Only if it's visible. How do we know if it's visible? If shapes theme group visible equals true, then we know it. We need to hide it. So the first thing we want to do is hide it. Dot visible equals false. Hide theme group. So now that we've hidden this theme group, now what I want to do is if the user makes the selection count large is greater than 1, then exits up. I should probably do this on another one too, on the other one, but we'll go ahead and I'll show you what I mean by that. And that means basically I should probably do that. That means when they select more than one cell, nothing's going to happen. That's what I want. But if they select more than one cell here, something happens. So we may not want that, right? So it can create errors. Keep that in mind. So continuing on. Now, if the user makes a selection change on cell E3, only what I want to do, I just want to display this group. Now, keep in mind, it's only going to display it. I didn't add any, of course, you can add additional features that's going to actually make sure it's in case it moves, right? We don't have a feature that could, it's very easy to add. You can challenge yourself, or I can put this on, of course, Patreon, but we may want to anchor it to this particular cell. That's a nice little challenge. Do you know how to anchor this group to this particular cell? Right now, look, it's going to show up wherever we've dragged it over. Wouldn't it be nice if we can add code? Of course we can. I've done it in my other videos, no problem. Wouldn't it be nice if we can anchor it directly below, even if the user moves it? Okay, so keep that in mind. That's a little challenge to you. How do we anchor it to just right below cell E3? So moving on, that's all we have to do. So that's it for the selection change code. Now I've got some macros that are associated with the setup screen, and I've placed them in the module setup macros. Just a few. First thing what I want to do is I want to list all of the sheets inside the workbook. And the first thing you want to do if you get something like this, you want to list all the sheets. If I delete this, right, those are really important. We need that. Notice there's no more linked. We need those sheets. So how do we do this? Well, we just run a little bit of a macro listing all the sheets. So if I run that macro, those sheets, I kind of put it on column B, really. We got to put them on column B. So we want to make sure, let's change that over. We want to make sure to do that. I think originally I had it on A. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to, first of all, clear all the contents of the original row, doing it like this, clearing all the contents of the original range from B4 to B99, setting initial row, sheet row, for each worksheet, dimension the worksheet as a worksheet and the sheet row as long for each worksheet in this workbook worksheets. What do I want to do? Setup in column B. Now I've changed it to sheet row value equals whatever name it is. We're going to increment that row one more. So when I run this macro a second time, we now see it's now in column B. I can delete column A. We now see we have those and they're now properly linked in because I simply linked them here. How do I do that? Well, if I know this is column 21, I know that's column 20, and I know this is row 4. How do I link it and use a single formula to do that? Well, I can do that using the indirect formula. Indirect B and the column, which is what I want to show, minus 17. So this column we know is 21. If I subtract 17 from that, I'm going to get 4. 4 is the right row that I want. B4 is where I want. This would be B5. So how do we get B5? Again, all we need to do is take the column. In this case, it's 22 minus 17 is 5. So now we have to do is just simply drag it over, and we do it. And if we don't want those zeros, maybe we don't want zeros to display, all we need to do is go into the file, right, inside our options, and go into the, bring it over, go into the advanced menu, scrolling down here, right, and down here all we see is show zero in cells that have no value. Unclick that, click OK, and now we see that no zero is showing up. So we can easily do that too. Okay, so now we see how we get those sheets very, very easily inside column B. And that's how you get all the sheets. All right, now what about the themes, right? I want to be able to do two things. I want to be able to select on this, and when I select a specific theme, I want the theme to change in this shape. This shape is called sample back. Now, how do we know the code for these? Well, we can just simply run a macro to do that, right? If I don't know what the themes are, we could do that with a macro. So if I go into the developers and I turn on macros, if I record macro, or if I click here to record macro, and we just call it a macro, and I decide I want to know the themes, let's drop this down, and I want to know all the themes of that. So all we need to do is just change it to themes. Now the macro's running, right? So let's go ahead and click gray, and then we'll click blue, and then we'll click red, and then we'll click green, and so on and so forth, purple and blue, okay? So now we're going to stop the macro, and we go back into the VBA here, and we see what's been created. If we module 1, we see that we have some shape styles that were created, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So we see all that. Everything's the same except the number. So now we realize that those particular shape styles are based on a number. So if we know that that number is all we need to use is that number, that's the only difference inside that. So we can use those numbers to do that. So let's go ahead and remove this module now. We don't need to save it. So it is those numbers that I'm going to use. So what I decided to do was apply that number to the name of the shape. So if I click on here and we click on the individual shapes, we see this is called style 22. This is called style 23, and all the way down to style 28. So if I can extract that number from whatever they've selected, I can then apply that theme, whatever they've selected, to the shape. And I've done just that here. So first of all, we're going to dimension the theme number as long, right? 22, 23, we need it. Now, what's that theme number? It's going to be based on the shape that they've selected, right? So if they've selected here, inside here, if they selected red or something, how do I know that? Well, all I need to do, if we take a look inside this, we see style 24. All I need to do is remove the word style, and it's going to be remaining with 24. If I know that that's 24, I can then apply that 24 through here. So we can do that here. There's some that are a little bit different. So the setup shape style, the sample back. Okay, so first thing I want to do is I want to extract that number. We're going to do that using application caller. Application caller is the name of the macro that called the shape. So again, if I try to run this macro right now, it's going to create a bug. Why is that? Something we've been over before, because there is no shape that called this macro. It's looking for the shape that called it. There's no shape because I ran it from here, right? This type of a macro, any macro that uses application caller, you must actually run it from a shape, right? From clicking on a shape. That will not create the error. Okay, so we're going to remove the word style, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with blank. So I'm basically replacing the word style with blank. What that's going to do is leave me with that theme number. Once I have that theme number, I can then apply that. The setup shape, sample back, shape style equals the theme number. So that's going to apply that theme number to this sample back. So if we see here, we change that, it's going to apply this, let's choose a different color, purple, to this theme back very, very easily. I also want to change the cell color here. That's kind of nice, something a little bit different. So how do we do that? Well, we can apply those themes with, I'm going to focus on with the setup range E3. I want to change the interior color of that so the user can quickly see what it is. The first one's a little bit different. We're going to, with the pattern solid, right? Interior solid, the pattern color index equals automatic, and the case now, so this is going to be the same for every single one, right? Every single shape going to take that solid pattern. It's going to have that color index as automatic. Now, but the theme color is slightly different. The theme color in the case of 22 is going to be dark, right? So this one's a little bit different, dark color 1. So this is that gray one. It's going to take on that. Now, because it's a little bit, remember, it's a little bit different. This is going to be accent 1. It's the closest thing. 24 is going to be accent 2. So I couldn't really apply these because the inside the cell is coloring a little bit different. So they're slightly different. Accent 3, accent 4, 5, and 6. So basically this is going to color the inside of the cell. And then I want to apply a tint and shade, the same regardless, and a pattern tint shade. So that's the same regardless. So that's going to color the cell. Then the last thing I want to do is once we've selected a specific theme, I want to hide that group. So we're going to hide the group. And then I want to select something else. E4 we're going to select. So that allows the user to simply select and select again and select again. So that's all we need to do to apply that. Great. So we've been over exactly how to create the sheets, how to create the theme. That's it for that. The next step and the last, of course, is actually how to create that quick view. And we're going to do that through the macro called quick view macros here inside this module, and that is going to be the one that actually creates these quick views. So how do we do that? All right, so let's get into that macro now. Okay, the first thing we want to do is dimension a bunch of variables. So we need the sheet name as a string. I want the shape group, that's the group that we're going to be creating. I want to create a group of shapes, and we need a string for that, and we also need an array to be able to create the group based on all the names of the shapes inside that group. I also want the picture field, a picture name, and a picture folder as strings. And of course, we need a picture path in case there's a picture. I need a full path of that picture. I also want the linked sheet and the linked ID, right? The linked sheet is the linked ID. Basically, if this is a linked, notice we have customer invoices, so I need to know the invoices. The linked sheet is going to be here, and the linked ID is going to be here. So we need to know that. And also what we want to do is we need the top position and the left position as double. As we build this shape of this quick view shape, I need to know also the top position. I need to move through. I also want to know the active row, the selected row, or the active row. In this case, it's 4, whatever we have. That's the row that we've been selecting on it. I also want to know the detail row, which detail row, and the header row as long. The detail row is going to be the focus on, we'll call this the setup row, the detail. It's going to be where all of our information is in this row. I need to know where we can locate the information for that. I also want to know which is the header row of the table, the data column as we move through the columns of data. What column are we starting at? What column are we going to be ending at? What is that linked ID? Is it an invoice ID or is it a customer ID? I need to know what column that's located on. So we're going to have that as long. And I'll walk you through these so you don't need to remember these. The last row, what if we're going to run an advanced filter, right? Which we do. We need to know the last row. I need to know the last column. And I need to know the last results row when we get those results from our advanced filter. We're going to need to put that in a variable. And I need to know the last result column because we're going to have to build up that table. We need to know that to create a range based on those results. Those results are going to create a range. So if I've got customer invoices, I need to create a range. I need to know the last column, in this case AE. So I need to know that, build up that range so we can pull up that range. So that will help us do that. So we're going to need to put that inside a variable also. And the last data column, I also going to create a shape. We're going to call that QV group. Notice we've created a shape here. It's going to be all group called quick view group. So we're going to put that into a variable. And I want to know the result, create a range of those results. It's going to be the results range. That's it for the variables. So now we're going to focus really on creating the only macro that we have there, the main macro called the quick view create. It is this macro that gets created regardless of the worksheet the user has selected. Now keep that in mind that when they make a selection change, let's say on customers, when they make a selection change, let's say they've selected anything and we want to make sure A contains a value, right? So that means there's data in the table. I want to put that target row that's going to trigger that conditional format, put that target row in E5. What does that mean? When they make a selection change, let's say on 5, I want to put that target row on 5. And I've created a conditional formatting here, if we click in conditional formatting based on that E5. So this conditional formatting here, this dark blue here with the white bold font, is based on the setup E5 in the row. That is going to trigger our conditional formatting regardless of the table. And the rest of the conditional formatting, simply the alternating rows, just gives it that background look. Okay, so we have that. And then the last thing is we're just going to create the rows. So that's all the code. So if you take this, all you need to do is put this code on any sheet you want. And then all we need to do is run that macro. There's that macro that we're going over now. So we're going to focus on the active sheet. All this was with the active sheet. This way we can use this macro regardless of the sheet that we've selected. So that way we do not necessarily need to specify any particular sheet, just the active sheet. The sheet name, we're going to put that into a variable. It's going to be called the active sheet name. And I want to make sure that this doesn't run on active sheet name, right? If we try to run this macro if we try to run this macro on the setup, it's going to say, please run this on the sheets other than the setup screen, right? We don't want this macro running on the setup sheet because that's just, for our setup. We don't want to run it there. We want to run it on one of our tables or databases. So now what I want to do is, if for some reason the current value, if the quick view, if it's visible here, then I want to delete it, right? So if I select something else, I want to delete the existing one is there. Now we can also delete it with this close button here, but I also wanted to delete that. So we can just delete it, right? If it doesn't exist, it would create an error. So all we need to do is wrap that in on error resume next, and on error go to 0. And I also want to clear the variable shape group. I want to make sure this is 0. We're going to be building up this string, but I want to make sure that it's clear. The active row is going to be the active cell row. The active column is the active cell column. I want to place that group based on something specific in the column 1 to the right and the row. So if I'm going to place this group in a specific location, I need to know what row and what column the user has selected. So that's why we have to put those into the variables here. And then also what we want to do is I want to find the detail row. What is the detail row? The detail row is based on the setup screen. What row? Customers, that's customers here, or invoices. What row? 5, 6. How do we know? Well, I'm going to look for the sheet name inside G5 all the way down, right? If that sheet name is found, then I'm going to know what row it's placed on, right? So we need that because I need to know all the information. I need to know the header row. I need to know the start column. So to extract all of this information, I need to know what row that sheet has been found on. That's why we couldn't have customers twice, remember? So, all right, so we show it up. We could, but it's just going to go with the second one. All right, so the detail row here is going to be based on the setup range G5 through G34. We're looking for that range. What are we looking for? We're looking for the sheet name. We're looking through Excel values and Excel whole. Okay, we're going to put that into the detail. I want to extract the row. Now here we go. If the detail row equals 0, that means the sheet's not found. Please make sure to the setup screen, the quick view tab is equal to the setup screen. Basically, we want to make sure that the sheet they are on here, for example, invoice item or whatever, we want to make sure that that sheet is located here. If it's not found, we need to let the user know that sheet has not been found. All right, so moving on. Now what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have inside H, we want to make sure we have a header row. I want to double check that H contains a value, right? I need to know the row of those headers, right? So we want to double check that here. If the setup range H and the detail row equals empty, or it equals H and the detail setup, this should be 0, just in case it's 0, right? Or H and the equals 0, or setup row, or G, this should be H, I, actually we need to change, I want to make sure that H, I, and J all contain values. So let's do that double check here. I'm going to change that to H, I, that was my original intention. I and J, I want to make sure all those contains values. H, I, we can put this to double quotes. So I want to make sure that H, I, and J contain values, right? We need to make sure that we have, let's put it here, note, header row, start column, ending column are all required. Ending column are all required. And same thing here in the message box, please make sure the quick view detail row contains a header row along with a starting and ending columns. Okay, so H, I, and J is where they are located. And then we're going to exit the sub. So those are required. Next up, we're going to move on. Now that we've done all, we've made sure that everything is required is already there. We can then turn off application screen updating and disable events. Now keep in mind that if you have a bug during this, you'll need to re-enable the bug. So usually I put a macro like on this macro here on the quick view delete, I'm re-enabling. So all I need to do is just run this macro. Sometimes you ever notice that you'll get a bug and then all of a sudden you start selecting something and nothing happens, right? So nothing's happening. Well, that's because enable events has been disabled. So the best way to do it is just inside a macro, just make sure you have this enable events equal true. And that happens because the code has stopped before we can enable events again, right? So the code has stopped. So the best way to do that is either run the macro again or just find a single macro. All you need is this line right here, and then that enables the events. Okay, so because we're disabling the event, so keep in mind when you do that and there's a bug, it can create a little slowdown. It's once you realize what happened, it's very easy to fix, but in the beginning of your coding career, it's kind of frustrating because you don't know what's going on. Okay, so we're going to assign that header row based on what's in column H. We're going to assign that start column in I and the ending column in variables in column J. So we get all three of those numbers inside variables. And I want to make sure if there's I want to know if there's a picture K and the value does not equal empty, then the picture field equals K in the detail row. What does that mean? Inside here, looking to column K, we see, is there a picture? I want to put that picture. If it's a picture, I want to know where that picture is located. What column is that picture located? So I want to put that inside a variable. So the picture field is going to be based on K and the detail row. That means I know if picture field is not empty, that means the user does want to show a picture in the quick view pop-up. So now what we want to do is I want to locate where the folder is. Where is your picture? It is possible that inside your customers, you may have the entire, notice I have just the picture names here. It is possible that you could have the entire path of the picture here. So you wouldn't need a folder if you have the entire path. But if you only have, of course, the name, what you want to do is you want to marry that name with the path, and that's going to give you a full folder path. So I have those located in a folder of mine, and that folder is located right here inside column L. So all my folders are located right here inside this. That's where those pictures are located. So if I marry this folder along with this picture and I put them together, then I create a full file path for that picture. Keep in mind that I will need to add on a backslash here because I didn't do it here, but I'll need to do it inside the code. Either one is fine, not both, but at least one. Okay, so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to set that picture folder up. Let me escape out of this here. We're going to set that picture folder up to equal to setup K and the zero. This is our picture folder here is in L, and here's where I add on the backslash here. So setup L in the detail row. This is our picture folder. Let's call this the picture folder, and that's only to make sure that L is not empty, right? And this is the picture file name. So we'll set this up, picture file name. Now, of course, we need the picture path. We'll be setting that up a little bit later on. I want to set an initial left position is going to be the ACL. What is the initial left position? It's going to be based on whatever the user has selected, right? So if they've selected here, that initial top position is going to be whatever row, and the column is going to be one column over. So we're going to do that. The left position is equal to active cell offset. We're offsetting up, in this case, the left one column to the right, one column to the right. If it was going to be to the left, it would be -1. If it was going to be a row down, it would be 1, and a row up would be -1 here. So we're going to set that initial, let's call this set initial left position, and below is the set the initial top position, set initial top position. So now that we've set both the top and the left position, we can then, what I want to do is I want to copy inside the setup screen, I have our sample background, right? I'm going to take this and I'm just going to copy it over into the current sheet. So to do that, all we need to do is set up act shapes sample back copy. This copies that background shape and it's going to paste it into the active sheet. I want to quickly assign a name. Once I assign a name to the shape, it's much easier to work with. So the selection, because we just copied it over, the name is going to be called QV, quick view, standing for quick view, and the sheet name. So underscoring the sheet name. I've just given it a random name that I can work with, and I know that it's on. So it's going to be called QV in the sheet name. Notice if I select on the background, it's called QV customers. If I select here on invoices, this one is called QV invoices, right? So we understand it's dynamic based on that. Okay, so now we can work with it. Now what I want to do is I want to put some text in there. So I want some header text. Notice this says invoices quick view, but this says customers quick view. So how do we do it? Well, first I've set the font here. I've set the font as in bold, Calibri, and 14, right? If I were to change this to, let's say we wanted to change it to blue, we could change it to blue or something like that. So now when we select it, it's going to change it. So now it's blue and blue, right? So all we need to do is change the sample. If we want to make it a little bit bigger, we can go to 16, and then we can go to maybe a dark blue, and then it's automatically going to change. So when we change that sample, it's going to change for everything else. All right, so we have it. So all I want to do is apply the text. What is that text going to be? The text of that background shape is going to be based on the sheet name dash quick view. So let's just see, you can give it any title. And I've given it the initial left position and the initial top position. I'm going to give it a width, our initial width, it could grow, our initial width of E4 values. So this is our initial width based on E4, which is that 250 pixels based on E4. All right, so once we've done that, that's it for now for this shape. Right? So now what I want to do is I want to build the interior. So all we've done at this point is this. Let's just stop the code here. Let's go ahead and stop the code so we can see where we are and then run it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run it and see where we are. So minimizing this, we see all we've done is set the width here. We've added the title. We haven't done anything else with it yet. So continuing on with the code, and it's going to build all. Now what I want to do is I want to build all these initial fields. The first thing what I want to do is I want to bring a label over and give it a name. Notice this says label 1, label 2. It's going to be based on the columns. So all we need to do is then take this sample label here and copy it over into this sheet. So that's what we're going to do right here. So set up sample label. We're going to copy that sample label and we're going to paste it inside. I also want to take the sample field here. This is the sample field right here. And I want to copy this over the sample field. I'm going to copy this over and bring this over directly into the sheet because I want to create these fields. This is called field 1. This is called field 2. So we're going to bring that over. So we're copying that over. And then again, also lastly, I want to take that close button. Remember, we have a close button. This little icon here is called close icon. Close icon. I want to copy that and bring it over. So with that close icon here, I'm going to copy that and we're going to bring it over. Okay, now that we have that, what I want to do is I want to place that close icon. I want that close icon placed directly in the upper right of that. I want that close icon right here. Notice it's here. It's here, but that's going to be dynamic. I also want it placed directly regardless of it. So based on the shape. But what if it's less? I can't. What I mean is if I don't have, let's delete this. If I decide not to include the table, I still want it showing up on the upper right. So how do we do that? Well, we can place that close group. The left position of this close is going to be based on the background, the left position of this sheet. So basically what I want to do is I want to determine what is the left position of this background, QV customers. The left position of this plus, which is here, plus the width of this, which would be right here, minus a little bit like 20 pixels or something. It's going to bring it back to the left. So that's just what we've done inside the code. It's going to equal the left position plus the entire width of that background shape minus 15. It's going to bring it back on the list. This is going to place close button. Okay, so that's going to place that close button always in the upper right hand corner. And then what we want to do is shapes. Then what I want to do is I want to build a group. This is a string. If I'm going to be grouping every single shape, notice it's all a single group. I've got to group all of it. To do that, I need to know all the names. This is QV customers. I need to know all of the shapes that belong in that group. This is the close button here. You can see quick view group here. So how do I do it? The name of this button is called close button. So what I want to do, close icon. So I need to take that, all of the shapes and put them in a single string. And I want to separate them by a comma. To do this, so the shape group now equals the background, right? The background that we and separated by a comma and the close icon. So now what I've done to this group here, it'll be a lot more, but we're starting this string out with these two shapes. once I have, the reason we do this is it's much easier to group them together once I know all of the shapes that belong inside that group. So the reason we do that. Now we're ready for the fields. Let's set the fields. We're going to run a loop, right? I want to know from the start column to the end column. If we're going to add in the customer ID, or maybe we don't want the customer ID. Maybe we only want to start it off with the customer name. So we're going to exclude the first column, right? So now we're going to start in column 2 and go all the way down. So we need to run a loop starting in column 2 and going all the way to the last column, running that loop. So we need to keep track of that data column as we move from the start column to the end column. First thing what I want to do is take that label shape. We've already copied that label into the current sheet. So I'm going to duplicate that, and I'm going to give it a very specific name. We're going to call it label in the data column. Notice that how we went over, this is column label 2 because it's based on column 2. It's got a very unique name. So we're going to create that label. Now what I want to do is I want to place that label. I'm going to work with it. Once I've named it, I can then work with it. So with the left position is going to be based on the left position here. Notice we've incremented the left position, right? I think we mentioned after we place the background, we've incremented the left position. So we brought it a little bit to the right, right? So notice they're not directly on there. It's a little bit, if they were directly on the right, it'd be right about here. So I've moved it 5 pixels to the right. So this would be exactly on it. So I'm moving it 5 pixels a bit. So adding 5 pixels. Also the top position, notice the top position is not up here. It's down here. I've added information, added a number 30 pixels from the top point. So this particular shape is now 30 pixels from the top. This would be right on the top. So this is 30 pixels down. So we've brought it down. So we've updated that top position, left position. So now we've set the left position. We're setting the width, a default width of 50 pixels. We're setting the top position based on the top position. Now what we need to do is assign it some text, right? I need to know that this text here is going to be based on the header row and whatever column. I'm going to setting that label here. So the text frame 2, text range text, is equal to the active sheet header row data column value. So this sets the header row. Then again, I want to add this here, this shape that we've created. I also need to add this to our shape group string. So we can do that here. The shape group is equal to whatever currently is in the group plus another comma in the label data column. So this is going to add that shape that we just created. We're then going to add it to this shape group string. Then we're ready for our picture. If there's a picture field, I need to know if it's a picture field or if it's a regular form. We need to differentiate. So if the picture field equals active shell header row, what I'm doing is I want to check. We know the picture field, we've added one, and it's called picture, in this case, J. I want to know, is the current data field picture? If it's picture, we need to do something different. If it's not picture, how do we know if it's picture? Well, picture we've extracted directly from here into K. So if it's not picture, then we just need to handle as a regular. But what if it is a picture? Okay, so in this case, if picture field equals active header row, it means check for the picture data type. All this if it's a picture, this if it's not a picture. So what are we going to do if it's a picture name? We're going to set that picture name. It's going to be the active sheet cells, the active row, the data column, right? I need to know what the name of that picture is. Here, what is it? Mary, JPG, Peter, or Dave? What is it? What is the name of that picture? Because I need to combine that name with the folder to create a file path. So if the picture name does not equal empty, then the picture path is equal to the picture folder and the picture name. Remember, we've created that picture folder all the way up here inside the picture folder here, and we've added the backslash onto it. So now we've completed a picture file path here. We've created that entire variable. Once we have that, we just need to make sure it's accurate. So if the directory picture path VB direct equals empty, if it equals empty, meaning it is an incorrect path, then we're going to go to the next field. We're just simply skipping it and going all the way down here to the next field. If it's not empty, that means we do have a correct picture. In that case, I want to insert that picture path. Insert using the dot pictures, insert picture path dot name, and we're going to assign it a specific name. It is that same name regardless if it is a text base or a picture base. I'm going to give it that same name. So that way the picture also has that. So picture here, it's going to have the same name as everything else. This picture is called field 10. This is the 10th field, the 10th column is where it's found. Okay, so we've given it a name, but else let's just say not picture text field. So in that case, all we need to do is duplicate our text field. Again, we have a sample text field that we've created and put it inside here. That sample field looks just like this, of course, but it's a sample. We're going to duplicate that and give it a name and give it a specific location. So we can do that with this line of code. Duplicating name, field, and the data column. Okay, regardless if it is a picture or regardless if it is a field name, we are going to give it a position. So with shapes, field, and data column, we're going to set the left position equals to the left position plus 60, right? Why do I want to give it a left plus 60? Because the left position is exactly this left position, but I want to move it over many pixels. If I think there's too much of a gap between here, maybe I want to put it to 55, right? So I want them a little bit closer together. So if we change it now, we will see that now the labels are a little bit closer, which is probably better, a little bit closer to our fields. Now it's a little bit closer. We change it to 55. Also, I want to give it a default width 160. If we change that default width, it's going to increase it, right? So maybe we want a bigger width, so now what we want to do is, let's say we set it to a bigger width, and we could do that to, so let's say 190, something a bit bigger, and then we change that. We can see that they're all bigger now, and we can see this is now a 2-line. Before it was 3, now it's 2-line, and you see they're a bit bigger. And we can show the entire address. So maybe we want it a little bit bigger. And we'd also increase this, right? In this case, we'd want to increase our maybe to 270, right? Increase our picture width. So now we have, it's very, very dynamic. So now we've increased it. So we have a lot of flexibility onto that. So we can set the width of that picture, of the field data. Now what we want to do is we want to set the text. The text is going to equal the active shape, active cell, data row. So this is the actual data. What is the actual data? Where is it coming from? Based on the data row, based on the column, what is we're going to move that data? So for example, this one's going to take this directly from column 2 and whatever row we've selected. So it's going to place that name directly inside the field. So once we have that, what I want to do is I want to use auto text size shape. This is very important. Why is that important? Because look, some fields have more text, right? I want to increase the height of this field based on the text automatically. So that way it's going to increase. So that way those have more, right? If I decide we're going to make this a very, very small field, let's say we have the width of only 100, that's going to change a lot of things here. So if we take a look inside here, now we see, look how it increased. So I want to increase the height based on this. So you see how it increases. I want that automatically to increase. So we do that. We can change that back. We can do that with this auto size shape text to fit. This will automate height of shape. Now, the important thing is we certainly don't want to we need to update the top position, right? Because the top position is not going to be the same. The top position here and the top position here, as we move it down, we need to update the top position. I'm going to show you how to do that next. So the top position is going to be the top position, and the shape group, again, we want to add to that text string because we're going to be grouping that in there. So we do that with shape group. Now we're adding the field or comma field and the data column. So we're adding that in here just like that. We're simply adding this to our shape group, always separated by a comma, always starting out with a comma. But I need to update the top position. But the top position is very important, right? If this looks like 3 pixels, what is the top position now, right? If it's a smaller field like this, I need to know that top position here. So that top position is going to be based on the height of this, right? As this height increases, the top position for the next field has to be based on the field before. So we do that through here. The top position is based on the top position of the current field, the top position of this field plus the height plus a little bit more, plus the height. So we always have to add in the height of the field. So it's going to be plus the height of that field plus 4. If we want more of a gap between fields, we just increase this, and then we have a lot more of a gap between the fields. So now that you notice there have more gaps, right? So we can do that as well. So we understand that that's going to increase the height. And then on error, go to 0. And the last data column equals the last data column. I want to make sure that we're setting the last data column. This is going to help us a little bit later on as we build the group. So I want to reset the last data column in case this is. I always want to know the last data column, make sure that it doesn't incorrect. Okay, so great. Now what I want to do is I want to check for linked tables, right? Do we have a linked table? How do we know? If this contains a value and this contains a value, that means I have a linked table. Then I want to link the table. I want to put in a table so that we have the customer invoices, meaning I want to show inside the invoice table, our link table, our customer based on our customer ID located here. We want to make sure, this is very important, that the invoice ID here, the name invoice ID, is exactly the name of the invoice ID here. So we want to make sure that is the customer ID here. Look inside the invoice, customer ID here. This is what I meant. Customer ID here is exactly the same as the customer ID here. That's linked. So we want to make sure our field labels are the same. That's good programming, making sure you're using the same field name, customer ID here, also in our invoices, customer ID here. So we want to make sure those are the same. It is that same field that we're adding directly in here. So our invoice table is linked to our customers by our customer ID. That is what's linking these two tables together. Once I know our customer ID is linked, I can then say, okay, filter all the invoices by the customer ID. And that's what we're going to do here. So we know that if we go down to, let's say, customers here, and I go into Peter or Fred, Fred's got to make an appearance, of course, and I know that Fred is customer ID 1, I need to then filter all of these invoices by customer ID 1 and make sure, it's a little bit annoying that it keeps popping up. It's because the reason is I required A, right? I required A to have that. So keep that in mind that it's going to show up wherever A is, but you could also do if the target value equals empty, then don't show it. Or you could say if the target header doesn't equal empty, I think it would make sense. We'll update that code. That means if there's nothing in the header row 2, then don't show the shape. Only show it. Maybe we'll do that update on Patreon. Only show it if the header contains a value, right? If the header doesn't, then don't show it. So that would be a good update for Patreon. All right, so what I want to do is I want to filter by that customer ID. I then want those results here, to locate it here. And then I want to take those results and I want to display them directly inside here. So that's what we're going to do with continuation of the code. So we're going to check for linked tables. And it's going to be based on those two conditions inside the setup screen, based on M containing a value and based on N containing a value. So that's what we're going to check here. M in the detail row does not equal empty, and N in the detail row does not equal empty. Then we know it contains information. Then all we need to do is determine what is the linked sheet. That linked sheet is going to be based in M. That linked ID is going to be based in column N. But I also need to know what column this linked ID is located. What column? Where is it located? That's very important. So the linked ID data column is a variable. It's going to be based on the sheet name and the header row, starting in column 1 all the way to the end column. Basically, what I want to do is I want to look for this and I want to find that linked ID. What column is located? Column 1, column 2. So what we're going to do is we're going to get that. We're going to find it to make sure it's been found, right? If the linked data is column, go to no data. We want to make sure that it's actually found in the customer. I want to make sure that that customer ID is actually found in the customer list. Now we're going to focus on the linked sheet, right? So I want to build up this. Let's go back into the customer here. I want to build up this part here, this section, this picture here. I want to build that up. So we're going to really focus, all that data is going to come directly from invoice. So we're going to focus on our linked data sheet. This is our linked data sheet. We're going to put the focus on that. So the first thing what I want to do is I want to determine the last row because we're going to run an advanced filter. Last row. So let's put a comment there. Last row. So once we have the last row, if it's less than 3, that means there's no data. We can exit out or go to no data. It's going to go all the way down here. If we do have data, what I want to do is I want to determine that criteria. I'm going to put that in a very specific cell, Y2. Remember, when you're building these things, if you have a very, very large table, make sure you're consistent with the way you're building these tables. So you always want the criteria on the same cells. You always want the results on the same cells. So in our particular workbooks, our criteria is going to be on Y2. And our results are always going to start on AA, and that's the same with its invoice items or with its invoices. So same for our sample. So if you do that, keep that in mind. If you have a lot of data, you can put it on many, many columns, later on. So keep that in mind. That's very, very important. So our criteria is going to be Y2. What is our criteria going to go? It's dynamic criteria. So what do I want to go? I want to put that customer ID, I want to put that directly here, and I want to put the customer ID here. So when I select it, I want to make sure, so if I delete that here, we don't need that here, and if I delete this here, I want to make sure that it automatically gets placed in again. So when I select customer, I want to make sure through VBA that we're not only placing the criteria, but we're placing the criteria header too. So we can do that. we're taking that criteria header. I'm going to put that in here in a note. Criteria header. Header is going to go into Y2. Our criteria value is going to go into Y3. Criteria value. Okay, it's going to go into Y3. So we're placing those through VBA. Next up, we're ready to run our advanced filter. Our advanced filter is going to be through A2. Should really be the dynamic based on the header row. So I'm going to put that here. A here. And the header row. Header row, right? If you're not sure, underline that. So make sure and, right, there we go, this dynamic. There, A and the header row through X and the last row. This is our original data. Then what we want is run an advanced filter. We're going to copy that to, and then we're going to copy it to the criteria is going to be Y2 through Y3. And then the results are going to go from A2 all the way through AX. Now keep this in mind. This is much larger than our original data, right? That's okay. Excuse me, right here, all the way through X. Notice that our original data here inside ends at G, right? But that's okay. I'm creating it all the way to X, right? That way if we add more, we don't have to change the code. So that way this code works regardless. So make sure that this code here, A through X, contains all of your original data. If you have more data, add this to more, right? So make sure you expand this based on your data, but make sure it's consistent for every single table, right? So just as long as it encompasses, it's okay if your data is less, but it cannot be more. So our criteria is Y2, our results are coming into AA all the way through AX. Remember, our results are much less than that. That's fine. Our results really only go to AE, but just in case, right, I've created it for all the way here, just in case, right, we have add more data or we have different tables. So that allows it for different tables. I want those results to get the last results are all good based on column AA. If that last results are less than 3, then go to no data. Then what I want to do is, now that I know the results, I know we've got results, what I really want to do is I want to get the last column. I know the last row, but I want to get the last column because I've got to get a range here. I need to know what that entire range, starting in AA1 all the way through AE. Why do I want that? Because I want to take a picture of this, and I want that picture to go directly inside here. We're going to use a picture for that. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing is I want to get that last result column. That last result column is going to be based on AZ. Remember, we're going to use a large column all the way to the right of our data. The first column with data to the left of that is going to be our column. That's the last column with data of our results. Once we have that, I'm going to set the range. This is a range. We're going to set that range based on our data. It's going to be based on row 1, column 27. Column 27, remember, always starts in AA. AA is 27, AA. So now that I know that our first column is always going to be A, but our last column is dynamic, our last row is dynamic, so we can set that up all the way to our last results row. This is going to set our results data range, okay? We're setting that into a range. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna take that range and we're gonna copy it as a picture. This one line of code does that. Copies the results as a picture. Copy results as a picture. Now what I want to do is, but I don't want the picture in this field. I want to take that picture and I want to bring them back into here, into this sheet, into the customer sheet. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to active cell. Inside our active sheet, we're going to select a cell, any cell. The current cell is fine. This helps us prevent errors. And then active sheet paste. I'm going to paste that picture inside, anywhere in the sheet, wherever sheet, just going to paste that picture. We haven't placed that picture yet. It's going to take this picture right here. It's going to place it somewhere in the sheet. I'm going to paste that here. Now all we need to do is place that picture exactly where we want it. So we're going to focus just on that. First of all, I'm going to give that picture a name. If we take a look, we see the name is called linked table. So I'm going to give it that name called selection. I'm going to assign name to the table. Okay, so now that we have that, we've assigned a name, what I want to do is I want to set the width. Now what we want to do is we want to increase. Remember, we had this width, the width was set the default probably about here, right? But since this includes the table, I want to set the width even more, right? But that width is dynamic based on, because we don't know the width of this table. So we're going to base it on the width of that linked table. So to do that here, shapes that width of that form, remember this is our background form, is going to be equal to the width, the current width of it, plus, right, the current width of whatever that background is. So basically, we're going to take the width of this, whatever it is, we're going to add on the width of whatever this width of this, and then a little bit more. So we're going to add on the width of that linked table plus 2 pixels. So that's going to increase the width beyond the table, which is exactly where we want. Now we've increased the background, but yet we have not positioned this table. We don't know where this is. I want to position it right here. Well, where do I want to position? I want to position it based on the top of this position, and I want to base it on to the right of that. So this is how we're going to do it. So with the link table, the top position is going to be the active sheet and the star column. Remember, the star column is our first column. What's our star column? 2. Field 2, we could use field 2 or we can use label 2. Both of them have the same top position. I want to place the top position exactly as that first column, in this case 2 here. So I'm going to place it based on that. So we're going to use the field, the top of that, the position, the top position of that first field. That is the same top position where I want to place that link table. Now all we need to do is place the left position. The left position is based on the active sheet, the field and the star column, the left of this field plus the width of this field plus 10. What do I mean by that? I mean the left position of this. Notice the left position of this field right here plus the width of this field plus 10, right? If we didn't plus 10, we'd be right here. But I want to add 10, it's going to move it over. So we're basically adding the width, taking the left position of this plus the width position plus 10, and that's where that's going to give it the perfect left position and the perfect top position. And that's what we do here. So the left position of it plus the width of that plus 10 is going to give us that perfect left position. So now we've placed it on the top. Now we place it on the left. That's it. Now it's already in the perfect position. The last thing I need to do is, of course, add this shape to our string. So that's string for grouping. So we do just that here. Shapes, close icon. Oh, we also got to reset the close icon. Remember, once we place that, I also have to update that close icon. That close icon previously, let's pull that up, was right about, oops, I closed it. It works well. Let's go up to here and let's add the table. Okay, so that close icon was previously probably around right here, right? I need to update the location of that close icon again. So we just need to add the same line of code that we did before. Update the close icon. So doing that here is going to be the active sheet, that background plus the width of that background minus 15. It's the same exact line of code we've added up here. Same exact, but we've just done it once more again because now we've increased the width of that. All right, so now again, we need to update that shape group, that string of all of our shapes based on that linked table. So it's going to be comma and that linked table. So whatever it currently is and comma, we're going to update shape group string. Now all we need to do, the last part of our macro, is simply take all of those shapes and group them together. But I also want to do is create a height. Okay, so what is that height? We need to reset the height of that, right? Haven't done the height of that background, right? We haven't updated the height of this, right? We don't know what the height is. So right now we're going to update that height. I want to update it to based on the last row, whatever the height. So in this case, field 10 was our last column, right? I want to know the height of that plus a little bit more. So whatever the last one, in this case it's a picture, but whatever it is, I want to place it based on that. So the height of that background is going to be based on the last data column. Remember the last column, that the top part of that field plus the height of that field, the top part. So here we're going the top part of this plus the height of this plus a little bit more. Plus, minus, but I also want to subtract out any other shape, the shape name QV. So I want to subtract out whatever the top of this is, just in case here, the top part of this position, that's going to create it. Plus 20 is going to set the height of the background, setting the height of the background. Now we have the height of that background, okay? Now, remember, we brought in a sample label. We brought in a sample field, so we can delete both of those. We don't need those anymore. We were using those to duplicate. Every time we created one, we would use those samples up here to simply duplicate, using the sample right here to duplicate it. And so we don't need those anymore, so we can delete those samples. We still have them on the setup sheet. We're not deleting them from the setup sheet. We're only deleting them from this sheet. So we're going to be removing those samples. Now what we do is we just simply want to take all those shapes based on that string that we've been increasing and growing. We want to take it, and I want to create a group from all of those shapes. To do that, we're going to set an array. This shapes array is an array that we dimension all the way up here under shapes array as a string. Okay, so we want to create an array based on all those shapes, and we're going to split it based on those columns. So I'm going to create an array splitting it based on those commas that we've been creating. Remember, we keep adding in a comma. So now what I want to do is I want to create an array, and I want to split that string based on that array. Once I have the array, we can create a group. We're going to set QV group, this is already a dimension shape, equal to shapes dot range shapes array group. This is going to group it. Now all we need to do is, based on this group, this shape that we created, we're going to assign a name called quick view group. That is it. Then all we need to do is say application enable updating equals events equals true and screen updating equals true. That's how we create the group. Lastly, all we want to do is delete it, right? Remember, once we've created it, I do want a button that when we delete it, it's going to delete it. We can delete it. We don't need to hide it because we'll be recreating it. So, of course, the macro that's been assigned to this is the same macro that's been assigned to this. It is the same macro that we're going to go over. So if we click assign macro, we see it's called quick view delete. That is the macro. So the first thing what I want to do is take that group and delete it. If for some reason it doesn't exist, I don't want it to create a bug. It might not exist if you try to run this macro and it hasn't been created. So we're going to wrap that in on error resume next, and on error go to 0. Next up, I want to clear the selected row, right? If I delete that here and I've selected a row, that selected row is going to be based on setup screen based on here, row 26, right? So whatever we've selected is going to be the row here. So I want to also delete that from the setup screen or clear the content. So when I close it out, that means the selected row is no longer highlighted because that conditional formatting is based on this E5. So by clearing it out, it also clears the selected row. So that's what we do here. Setup E5, clear the content. And then application enable events equals true, just in case there was any issues with that. That helps. That is how you create a quick view pop-up complete with picture and linked table, either for customers or invoices or any table you may like. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your support. Don't forget to click on the subscription and notifications. We will see you next week for another incredible training. Thanks again.